Got it. Fill up the other one.
Last page, last week.
Okay, Matthew chapter 18. We did.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
First, we're in the wrong place.
We're accepting the risk.
No, we have a cyber attack going on.
All right, we last week we didn't quite finish up the lesson, so I wanted to take a few minutes and finish it up. So back to verses 18, 19, and 20 in chapter 18, which is really the wrap up of last week's lesson, which was on discipline, church discipline, those of you who remember. And it talked about the process that the church is to go through when they find someone in sin, and and then we looked at the at Liberty's process and compared them, et cetera. So I did want to pick up 18, 19, 20. So what I want to do actually is begin with 20 and then go backwards, because if we understand 20, then we can understand 18 and 19. So we'll start with 20. It says, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them." So this is a general statement that is used many times. You'll hear it talked about, right? When 2 or 3 are gathered, I'm there. It's talked about a lot relative to prayer, but it's actually put here for a very specific reason. And the reason is having to do again with church discipline. He's going back to, what is it, verse 16, right? As part of the process, right? The third part. But if he will not hear, take with you 1 or 2 more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And what he's saying in verse 20 is, when 2 or 3 of you get together for a church discipline activity, I'm there in the middle of you. I'm there, right? I'm there supporting that. I'm there encouraging that. I'm there listening and participating in the disciplinary process that you guys are engaged with. If 2 or 3 of you who know me and who love me and who are a part of who I am, then I'm there in the midst of them. Which then go back to see what he's saying in verse 18 and 19. He says, "Assuredly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, I say to you that if 2 of you agree on earth concerning anything that they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven." Again, all of this is relative to church discipline. Does it have general truth also? Yes, of course. But the point is, he's trying to say something here about church discipline. He's trying to say, if you go to this person and you go through this process and they repent, then you are to forgive them. And that means that I also have forgiven them. That means I also have accepted their repentance. You cannot accept their repentance. You cannot forgive them unless I am in the middle of that. And he's saying I am in the middle of that. If 2 or 3 of you go and meet with them about their sin, then I'm in the middle of that. And therefore, if you forgive them, then I am also forgiving them. You cannot forgive them unless I forgive them. You cannot accept their repentance unless I accept their repentance. And the opposite is also true, right? If they do not repent and you have to go to the next step to send them before the church, I'm in the middle of that also. I am leading you. I am directing you. Don't feel like you're out there on your own. I am there with you. That's the whole point then of verse 20, right? Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them. So I just wanted to add that on. It's really an encouraging word as we go through this disciplinary process, that Christ is in the middle of it, that you're not going to do anything that goes against his will, because he is there in the middle when the 2 or 3 of you get together, and he will make sure that you're following his will in the interaction that you're having with this other person. Okay, got that? The other thing I wanted to say last week, and we ran out of time. When it comes to our prayer list, one One person we need to add to our prayer list is our good friend Tim Bowles. Tim is smack in the middle of this disciplinary process when it occurs, and it is a stressful, painful, heart-wrenching process. And just from the experience that I've had with them in the past, it tears you apart when you see someone whose life is ripped apart because of sin, and you have to exercise discipline. And for some of these, who are staff members, that means the loss of their livelihood. It really impacts their family. So I just we need to be lifting up Tim. He's in this is not something he's going to talk about because it's all very private and personal matters, but it can tear you up. So you should be remembering Tim in prayer, just as he has to deal with these kind of situations, unfortunately, on what's becoming a more regular basis, just because of the way the world is.
And Kim.
You can remember Kim too, but it's,
And people may not know that Tim's chairman of the deacons, and that's why.
yeah, that's why, right? Yeah, Tim is chairman of the deacons, and because of that, he's in the middle of this process. Yeah, thanks, CT. All right, so let's go on to today's lesson, which begins in verse 21. Now, what's amazing about the Lord is he understands how well how we react to things and what's going on. And as I said, this whole chapter 18 is about treating and understanding the childlike behavior of Christians. And this last section here from 21 really to the end of the chapter is really about forgiving Christians like you forgive children. Christians, like children, mess up. And he's really saying we ought to forgive Christians just like we forgive children. In other words, when a child spills over milk at the table, this is not the time to go on a rant about how terrible they are, right? This is the time to be forgiving and understanding. They're just children, and they're going to knock over milk, right? And he's saying the same thing is true of Christians. Christians are like children in God's family, and they're going to mess up, and they're going to make mistakes, and we ought to be thinking about them like children and forgiving them like children. Forgiveness is key to relationships, key to meaningful relationships, and so it's got to be a key part of what of our response to God's children, who are the other people that, as you look around the room, right? I do want you to look at Proverbs chapter 19 before we get into this, just because it's such an important statement about this. You need to. It's one of those statements in Proverbs that you need to have an asterisk by. Let me also mention, as you're looking that up, Joe and I both have colds. She is coughing, and so sorry about that. I have sneezing episodes where all of a sudden I have 5 or 6 sneezes in a row. So when that happens, I'll try to put the mute on, but yeah, that's the way it is. Anyway, where was I? Proverbs chapter 19, verse 11 says, the discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression, or his glory is to forgive. Right? His glory, the best part of a man, the thing to glory about a man is when he is forgiving. That's when you see that's a real man. That's a real Christian. That's a real human. When they're forgiving of others, it's the glory of a man to forgive. I just find that to be a powerful statement that's made here. And of course, the other passage that you need to see in this context is Ephesians chapter 4. If you could flip there a minute. And again, I just want you to, these are some of those critical statements in Scripture that you need to have. Ephesians 4, verse 32. Let's put that again with the Galatians. Ephesians 4, verse 32. And mine says, and be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you, which is really the theme of this whole passage that we're about to study, right? Forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. Recognizing our forgiveness is critical to our ability to forgive others. one person we'll look at is you remember the story of Joseph, right? When his brothers come and after all of the terrible things that they did to him, he ends up forgiving them, and he makes this statement, right? You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. What an incredible attitude! What an incredible forgiving attitude! That yeah, even though these terrible things happened to me and you did them, and God and and you meant it for evil, God had a bigger picture and he meant it for good. He meant for something else to happen. Forgiveness, compassion, it's God's heart. It's radiating who he is. The other passage I'll show you in 2 Corinthians chapter 2. You can turn there if you like, but 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 6. I'll just find it. It says, this punishment which was inflicted by the majority is sufficient for such a man. So here in 2 Corinthians, Paul is sending a letter back to the Corinthians and saying, you guys have disciplined this person in your midst. And he says in verse 6, this punishment which was inflicted by the majority, when it came to the church and they inflicted discipline, is sufficient. Then verse 7, so that on the contrary, you ought rather to forgive and comfort him, lest perhaps such a one be swallowed up with too much sorrow. Therefore, I urge you to reaffirm your love for him. Right. So this is the point, that they sent it to the church. The church acted on this person, and now it was time to forgive. Now it was time to go the next step, reaffirm your love, bring him back into the fold. That's the pattern, and that's the really the teaching that we're going to have as we get into verse 21. All right, so let's get into verse 21 then. It says, then Peter came to Christ, right, and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? So we yell at Peter a lot, but this is actually Peter trying to be helpful. Jesus has just said, you've got to you got to discipline your brother, you got to discipline him, and then you got to forgive him. And Peter's like, well, wait a minute, how many times? I mean, how many times if he repeats the same thing over and over and over? How many times do we forgive him? Is there a limit to forgiveness? Is there a time when we say no more? Now, Peter's probably thinking to himself, okay, I'm going to say, how about 7 times, Jesus? He's probably thinking, oh boy, Jesus is going to think, you've done good, Peter. Congratulations for going to 7, right? Because the Jewish tradition at that time was actually you should only forgive a person 3 times. In fact, back in Amos, and you can go back there if you want, in chapter 1 of Amos, it says that if a man sins and asks forgiveness, you should forgive him. If he sins again, you should forgive him. If he sins again, you should forgive him. If he sins again, you should no longer forgive him. I mean, it's very clear in the Jewish tradition that 3 sins was enough. You shouldn't go to 4. So Peter here is being very gracious and saying, well, maybe can we go to 7, Jesus? Is that okay? And of course, Jesus has a very different answer in the next verse. But that's the basis upon which he comes up with the 7. Of course, it's also the perfect number, so he thought he had it right. So look at verse 22 then. Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. So 70 times 7, of course, that's 490 times. So at 491, you no longer have to forgive him. Right? Of course, that's not what Jesus is saying. He's just saying there is no limit, right? There's no limit to forgiveness. It doesn't matter how many times he does this against it, you are to forgive him. We are called to mercy. We are called, you remember even back in chapter 5, right? Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. We're going to come back to that verse a little bit later, but blessed are the merciful, the forgiving, that is what God expects of us. Now, before we get into verse 23, there's a couple things I want to say. One is we're certainly instructed to forgive. Are we also instructed to forget? Is it forgive and forget or just forgive? What do you think?
Forgive and forgive.
Why do you say that?
You can't forget everything, but you can forgive.
And maybe you shouldn't forget, so you can be prepared. If it happens again, you're a little bit better prepared. You've just learned a lesson by not forgetting. You shouldn't forget, you shouldn't remember it just to be able to hold a grudge. But you should be able to remember to have learned a lesson and be prepared.
He was.
That applies a lot to yourself too.
Yeah.
You don't
Say
want
that
to
again,
forget.
Curtis. I didn't hear you.
You said,
Same here.
I said that applies a lot to yourself too. I mean, we can ask for forgiveness, God forgive us. We should feel forgiven, but it's good not to forget certain things. You want to remember them because you want to know, you want to remember maybe the pain you caused, what you did, and know not to do it again. That's
I
the
understand.
Curtis thing.
Yeah, no, I understand that part, Curtis. I am talking about when others sin against us in this particular case, but I certainly understand what you're saying there. I will say that the dilemma that we have here is we often use for remembering as an excuse for not really forgiving. So we have to be really careful with that, right? Because to forgive in the way that God talks about it here is forgive as if it has never happened. To treat that person as if it has never happened. It's complete forgiveness. Now, does it mean that you totally forget? I'm not going there, but I am saying that you've got to make sure it's real forgiveness. It's true, complete forgiveness. Forgiveness as if it has never happened. And the way that you treat and the way that you respond to that person is that thing never happened, right? As far as the East is from the West, it's never happened. Because again, that's the way God treats us, right? As if those things had never happened.
Yeah, if you forgive and then your emotions keep coming back when you think about it, you haven't really forgiven. You know, it does come back. You can't have any of those ill feelings with it either.
But who said it comes back? I mean, when you could forget it and 5 years from now, something along the same lines happens and it pops back up. It's been explained like a computer hard drive. It's there, it's in the memory regardless of how you delete it. So it's not that you're keeping it for revenge, but it does come back to remind you that it's happened again. But in the truth that you have forgiven them, it's just your mind brings it back when it happens again.
Yeah, let me give you an example, and this is not an exact example, but it's illustrative, I think. So I have a relative who has borrowed money from me on a couple of occasions, and in those occasions, in my head, I have said that's just a gift, right? They're always, we're going to pay you back, we're going to pay you back, we're going to pay back. Now, I never thought they would actually pay me back. And so in my head, it's a gift. It's completely out of my head. Now, when a lesson like this comes up, I remember that, right? But it's not like I'm holding something over them. I'm thinking, when are they going to pay me back? When, so to David's point, I agree. It's still back there on the hard drive somewhere, but it's not in the interactions that I'm having with that individual. It's not there, right? It's not something alive. That changes the way that I interact with them because of that sin in the past. And I think that's what he's trying to say here. Does that make sense?
So
Okay.
what I last week. So when we got friends who have really not repented, and it's a couple, and one friend is the guy's gone off and he's not changing his mind. How do we deal with that? I mean, I struggle. I mean, because I think I've forgiven, but I struggle with how I'm going to interact with him when I see him, if I see him. I mean, so that's one of the biggest ones for me. I lost good friends. I'd say lost, but they were good friends.
Yeah, to be fair, this passage does not deal with that, CT. It's really talking about a brother and a brother who repents, right? And if
That's what I
you got,
was-
I'm sorry,
I did what I was kind of wondering if it had to do with, there was repentance there. Yeah.
it really does have to do with someone who repents.
Okay.
That's what's being talked about here. Now, to your point, though, in other places in Scripture, it does say that we're to forgive regardless of whether there's repentance, because the problem is not them, the problem is us, right? The problem is we hold on to bitterness, disappointment, anger, right, which eats us alive and doesn't bother them at all. So forgiveness is important for our mental health, if you will, for our standing with God. It's very, very clear that we've got to forgive in those cases. Now, that doesn't mean, so in those cases, it doesn't mean that we forgive and therefore the relationship is back where it was, because unless there's repentance, you can't bring the relationship back, right? So I think that's the difference. You got to do you got to do the forgiveness for you, for your health, for your brain, for your relationship with God. But the relationship is really dependent upon repentance. Does that help any?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, Rich, I found that it's not a one and done thing either. It's a continuous forgiving. Like Curtis said, it'll come back up, and David said it's in your hard drive, but when it does come back up, it's a continuous effort. It's not a one and done. I mean, I'm not built that way. I don't know if
No,
many people are.
I think you're absolutely right, and it's it's going back to God, saying, God, I got to lay this back on you again, right? I need your help in not being forgiven and having these attitudes, right? That we cannot forgive painful things that have happened to us unless God does a work, right? Unless God does a work in us, unless God helps us. So don't ever think, well, I just got to try harder to forgive. No, you got to ask God to do a work in you to forgive. That's the only way that happens. All right. Anything else?
Kind of the testing to be sure, not to be sure that you have forgiven, but hearing CT talk about a couple. We've got a couple in our life that have, they both profess to be Christians, but their marriages broke up and one is going on and remarried and there's no difference in what he's doing. He's keeping on what he's doing. I don't think about that until CT brings up there was a couple. Well, I've forgiven that. It brought it up, but it doesn't mean, oh, and I gotta hop back on this and go back to that. I forgot it. It's, all intents and purposes, it's gone. But we all, it's not necessarily something personally that we're holding on to. It's gone until somebody else brings it up. Thanks, CT.
So I say that's one of the things that I do remember to try to make sure I don't get into that position.
Yeah.
That I don't fall in
Yeah, exactly.
situation. So it is a remembrance for me that I use it as a lesson, try to use it as a lesson that, okay, I'm not going there. And I've seen husbands and wives where I don't know how in the world the wife or the husband, I've seen both, they forgive and they move on as a couple and get through that situation. And I'm sure that wife doesn't forget. And that's another instance where she should remember so that she can kind of keep her eyes open, future, and they work together to try to make sure it doesn't happen again, maybe.
Well, I'd be careful there because again, I've worked with several couples who have, gone through adultery situations, right? And the ones that have worked, in other words, the couple has gotten back together and have thrived, are the ones where the wife, when the husband is the adulterer, when the wife has really completely forgiven, to the point where that is not part of their conversation. It's not part of, she doesn't bring that back up, right, later.
No.
So, yeah, so that it really is complete forgiveness, forgetting, and I mean, acting like it has never happened. That's the only way those couples survive to a new relationship. So I'm just saying you got to be careful with what you've said there, CT.
I know what we're saying, trying to say anyway.
Yeah. I'm not trying to dismiss what you're saying. We just got to be careful with it. So.
Yep.
All right. Anything else there? That's the easiest part of the story. All right. Let's go to, so verse 23 and following, we have a little parable that Jesus tells them. And before we get into the parable, there's two things I want to say to you about it. One is, there are those who use this parable to teach that you can lose your salvation. Okay. And so we're going to, and I just want you to know up front, I don't believe you can lose your salvation. I don't believe you got it because God gave it to you. You're not going to get rid of it unless God pulls it away, which he's not going to do. So I don't believe you can lose your salvation. Second thing is, they say this parable is obviously not about Christians because Christians certainly would not act this way. And God certainly does not act this way. And so I'm going to talk about those things as we go through it, but I just want you to know, I do believe this is about Christians and this is about God as we go through this parable. So let's dive into it. Verse 23 says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. So therefore, it starts with, so therefore means it's connected to what he has just talked about, which is about forgiving your brother, right? It's about forgiving your brother being a Christian. I believe, again, this is a passage about Christians. These servants are servants of the king being God. This is, again, about forgiving your brother who is this slave, this bond slave in this particular case. He again talks about the kingdom of heaven. Who remembers from last week? What is the kingdom of heaven?
Our future
Everyone
home.
who's in the presence of God.
Yeah, it's where God rules, right? Where God rules, which means you're in the presence of God, which means those who are Christians, right? All that. But the kingdom of heaven is where God rules, the sphere of God's rule. Now, he says here, therefore, I'm looking at the wrong verse. No wonder you're confused. Verse. Yeah, okay. No, I'm not looking at the wrong verse. I'm just confused. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like, right? He's used this before. If you remember back in chapter 13, he said the kingdom of heaven is like a pearl of great price. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. This is another example of using that phrase to tell us what this kingdom of heaven is like. What is it like where God rules? What is it like where God is in charge? And he gives us this parable to give us that. Obviously, the king here is God, right? And he talks here about a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. And the word there really is bond slaves, right? Those who belong to the king. And again, what I'm going to try to do as we go through here is talk about what's in the parable, then also the explanation of what the parable is for us. So the parable is for us. This is God, and it's us as the bond slaves. We are the bond slaves, and the king, God, is coming to them to settle accounts, right? To take account, to take account of his servants. What is the accounting that God is taking of his servant here? What's the message for us? That God is taking account of his servants. What's the message for us?
Judgment?
It's judgment, but it's not final judgment. Okay, he's not talking here about the end times. He's talking here about an accounting during our life. God is taking an account of us during our life. So what does that mean? Does God look at us and examine us during our life? Say yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. What is he doing in that accounting and looking at us?
You're looking at the things we did for him, you're looking at the things we did against him.
Yeah, right. He's looking at our lives to see how we're living this life that he has given us, this amazing gift that he has given us. And certainly as a part of that, he's looking at the sin in our lives, right? He's paying attention to sin, and he's taking account of that sin that's in our lives. So this picture, this parable is really about the accounting of sin in a Christian's life. All right? Let's go on to verse 24 then. It said, when he had begun to settle accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. Now, the thing that you need to understand, we don't understand a lot about, the Old Testament, the Old and New Testament money exchange, but talents is an accounting of money, and 10,000 talents is a giant amount of money. Okay, back in the Old Testament, when they built the temple, and they talked about covering this and that with gold. Gold, they covered this with gold, they covered that with gold. They said the amount of gold that they used to cover the temple was 3,000 talents. Okay, a lot of talents. So the estimation by people today is that this is somewhere between $2 and $20 million. Okay, a big number. Today, and in fact, the expression is used in Scripture just to mean a really big number. We would say today, zillions of dollars, right? And in fact, if you remember in Revelation when we're there, he talked about 10,000 times 10,000 angels. The point is, it's an uncountable number. So when he says this man has come to him who owes him 10,000 talents, he's saying he owes him so much that there's no way he could pay it back. It's incalculable. It's unpayable. It's beyond accounting the money that this servant owes him. So what's then the interpretation of that for us? The sin load that we carry towards God is incalculable and unpayable. And it's only through the blood of Christ that sin can be paid for. We humanly have no way to pay for that sin load, and it's only through the blood of Christ that can be paid. Make sense? I think that a big point in this parable is the recognition of our sin and the recognition of the load of our sin and the size of our sin in God's eyes. In Romans chapter 7, verse 13, it talks about the exceeding sinfulness of sin. Turn to Psalm chapter 40, man. I want you to see this one. Psalm chapter 40. Psalm 40, verse 11. Psalm 40, 11. Mine says, do not withhold your tender mercy from me, O Lord. Let your loving kindness and your truth continually preserve me. For innumerable evils have surrounded me. My iniquities have overtaken me, so that I am not able to look up. They are more than the hairs of my head, and therefore my heart fails me. Be pleased, O Lord, to deliver me. O Lord, make haste to help me. Right? That's the poor in spirit brokenness that we are to approach God, right? Recognizing the enormity of our sin. And I'm afraid sometimes that we get this idea that when we're saved, we were okay, and then God saved us to glory, when in fact we were not okay. We were a mess. We were in sin. We were going to hell until God saved us to glory. And that is the picture that he's trying to paint here with this 10,000 talents. And it's worth us pondering what is the enormity of my own sin, because that's honestly, it's the only way that we appreciate the glory of God, the grace of God, what he has given us in this salvation. And it's the only way that we then can communicate to others the amazingness of what God offers them in salvation, if we recognize the enormity of the sin that we have and that God has forgiven us. All right, keep going. Verse 25, back in Matthew 18. But as he was not able to pay, his master commanded that he be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and that payment be made. So again, he was not able to pay. This was something beyond his capability, and the master there has the right, has the authority to sell him into slavery, to sell his wife, to sell his children into slavery. It's a very severe punishment that he is given to this man. But it is a picture of hell. It's a picture of someone who cannot pay for his own sin, and therefore God sends him into servanthood to Satan, right? God sends him into hell. That is the picture, that this man cannot pay for this debt, just in the same way that we cannot pay for our sin, and the punishment then is servanthood to Satan. Verse 26. The servant therefore fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. The servant fell down before him. Some of you will say, and worshiped him. The point is, he fell down prostrate before him, broken, shattered. He realized at this point the weight of his sin, the size of his sin. If he was going to get this kind of punishment, he knew the master understood the size of his sin, and that was the punishment that was required for it. You notice here, he doesn't deny his sin. He doesn't push back on, well, I didn't really, maybe it's not so bad. He's broken and shattered. Now, he does interestingly say, Lord, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. Now, this is typical human response. Yes, I know I'm a sinner. Yes, I know I've done bad things. I'll try to do better. I'll try to clean up my act. I'll try to get things straight. I'll try to pay you back for the things that I've done wrong, right? That is just works salvation, and by another word. And this is what he's saying. God brings them to account, brings him to understand his sinfulness. He is broken here, but his response is still human. It's still, well, I'll take care of this. I'll fix this somehow. He still doesn't quite get the enormity of his sin, the size of it. He's not able to pay it back. There's no way that he can pay it back. And the same again is true of us when we're in sin. There's no way for us to pay back that. It's got to be by Christ's blood that is paid back. Now, even with that, go ahead.
Man, my Bible says he begged him.
He begged him.
And I've always loved the story. When I read on and see what he did, it gives me the impression he didn't have any intent on paying him back. He was just begging him, trying to get him to change his mind, but he knew all along he wasn't going to do it. But you're sort of saying the opposite.
Well, I'm saying he's trying to figure out in his human brain what he can do about this, right? I'm going to pay you back. I'm going to try, but I'm going to beg you, not to throw me in jail, not to sell my wife and children, into slavery. I think that's what the begging is all about.
People today, they beg you, they cry in front of you, they should throw a pity party, whatever word is. And in reality, they don't even believe what they're doing. They're just trying to put a front up.
Well, let's get to that when we get to the second part of this story, because this is the part of the story where he's dealing with the king. In a minute, we'll talk about people to people. But here he's dealing with the king. Let's look at verse 28. Let's keep going so we get to that. It says, but that servant, oh, I'm sorry, verse 27. It says, then the master of that servant was moved with compassion, released him, and forgave him the debt. I got to tell you, this is the craziest verse in scripture, right? I mean, here's this guy who owns him 10,000 talents. It's completely unpayable. And he comes to him, he comes to him with brokenness, but he still doesn't quite understand the enormity of his debt. And still, God forgives him. Still, God has compassion on him and forgives him. Now, I got to ask this question. Why did God forgive him?
Because he wanted to.
When he does.
Yeah,
That's who we,
that is absolutely the right answer. It's because he wanted to. Did this man deserve to be forgiven?
no.
No, right? There's nothing he deserved in him being forgiven. It's because it is what God does. It is who he is. He has compassion. He has forgiveness. And he forgives this man because he decided to forgive this man. I mean, again, I want to go back to the picture of Joseph and his brothers, right? Did Joseph have any reason to forgive his brothers? No. It's only because in God's oversight, he gave Joseph the ability to forgive his brothers. Now, I got to ask this question. Did he really forgive this man? Did God really forgive this man? Did the king really forgive this man's debt?
Said it.
Okay, you got that? Yes, you said yes. I wrote that down. All right, you really did forgive him. All right, so we're going to keep going then. And obviously, before we go on, obviously the picture here is, God puts away the enormity of our sin because of his compassion, because of his grace, because of his love for us, not because of who we are, not because we're wonderful, not because we say, well, we're going to try harder, we're going to do better. No, it's just because God decided, which is just mind-boggling. It's as mind-boggling as this king forgiving the 10,000 talents or frankly more. All right, then we have the crazy part of this story in verse 28. The servant therefore fell down before him. Whoops, where am I? Verse 28. But that servant went out and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. And he laid hands on him, took him by the throat, saying, pay me what you owe. So again, that servant, the servant who was completely forgiven, the servant who had all of his debts taken away, finds one of his fellow servants. So again, in our picture, finds a fellow Christian, finds another person who belongs to this king, who owed him only 100 denarii, right? This guy owed 10,000 talents. This guy only owned 100 denarii. 100 denarii, a denarii is probably like $50 today. There's 6,000 denarii in a talent, right? So the difference between what this guy owes and what the first guy owes is, is incalculable. It's gigantic, right? It's trivial. Now, the same is true. Now, this is an important lesson right here. When someone sins against you, when a brother sins against you, that sin is trivial compared to your sin against God. Your sin against God is like 10,000 talents. Your brother's sin against you is like 100 denarii. That's the picture we ought to have when someone offends us, when someone does something wrong against us, realizing the difference in how God has forgiven us compared to some slight, some damage, some hurt that a brother does against us. So now wait a minute. if this is someone who has been forgiven, why does he not forgive his brother? If this is someone who's had the debt erased, why does he not erase the debt of his brother? So this is certainly not a picture of a Christian, because certainly if a Christian who understands that his debt has been erased, certainly he forgives his brother, right?
No, not necessarily.
Yeah.
No, right, not necessarily. We're stupid humans, right? We do not remember the debt that God has paid. We do not remember the forgiveness that has occurred to us when a brother slaps us across the face, when a brother hurts us, when a brother does something evil to us. We don't remember. We act just like this guy. We grab him by the throat and choke him. Let's keep going and we'll come back to that point. Verse 29. So, because it gets worse. So his fellow servant fell down at his feet and begged him, saying, "Have patience with me, and I will pay you all." Right? He has the same response back. The same thing that this man has said to the king, his fellow servants is now saying to him, "Have patience with me, and I will pay you all." Right? Which has no effect on this man. Verse 30. And he would not, but went and threw him into prison till he should pay the debt. He cast him into prison, no compassion. And by the way, when he cast him into prison, then he has no way to pay him back, right? It's just a vindictive response that he has here. There's no way that this person can ever do anything about this debt. So again, can this be a Christian? Do we throw people into prison? Do we throw people away? Do we not give them a chance to pay their debt, to get out of the prison that we put them in? Do we cast aside someone that God wants in our life, that God wants as a testimony in our life? Do we choke a person, throw him into prison, into anger and bitterness? Don't answer that question. The problem is we do, right? Someone hurts us, someone says something against us, someone defrauds us, and we throw that person away. We put them in a box and say, I'm not going to deal with that person anymore. I'm not going to get hurt again. I'm not going to give him another chance. We put him in prison and we give him no chance to get that debt repaid. Anybody want to argue with me? Aren't we glad that God didn't throw us away? Right? Aren't we glad that God didn't leave us in prison? Verse 31. Oh boy, I'm not looking at the time. I'm in trouble. Verse 31. So when his fellow servants saw what he had done, they were very grieved and came and told their master all that had been done. So his fellow servants, i.e. the other Christians, they come and what do? They go and tell the master what he's done. What does that mean for us? This is simply step 4 in the discipline process, right? It's bringing it to the church so that the church can be concerned for this man. You notice it says when they saw it, they were grieved. They were sad. They weren't angry. They weren't mad. They were sad. They were broken. And so they brought it to the king, which is what we're supposed to do. Bring it to the king, right? Pray about this individual. Lift him up to the Lord. That's what is being taught here. Verse 32. Then his master, after he called him and said to him, "You wicked servant, I forgave you all your debt because you begged me. Should you not also have compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you?" Now, wait a minute. The master, we're talking about God here, he calls this servant who he has forgiven, and he says, "You wicked servant." Does God ever think of a Christian as being wicked? Say yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? When we sin, wicked is another word for sinning. When God sees us sinning, he sees us sinning. And he says, you wicked servant, you sinful servant, right? I forgave you all that debt. I forgave you all that debt, and you wicked servant. Could you not have compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you? That's what he's saying to us, right? You wicked, he's taking account and he's seeing your sin in the way that you're treating your brother. And he's saying, you wicked servant, why you're not having compassion. Verse 34, his master was angry and delivered him to the torturers until he should pay all that was due to him. Right. Does God get angry with us? Say yes. God gets angry with us. God gets angry because of our sin. He's not happy about it. He's not saying, oh, look at my poor little guy down there. He's sinning. No, it's sin. It makes him angry. And then it says he delivered him up to the torturers. Mine says, some of yours may say tormentors, some may say jailers. So what is going on here? Does God, when we sin, does God deliver us up to the torturers? What does that mean?
Removes his hand of protection.
Keep going.
He allows the consequences of our sin to take effect until we repent.
I think that, yeah, both of what you said is on the right line, right? I mean, it's he. You remember last week we looked at Hebrews chapter 12, verse 5. You can look back at it later, but it says that the Lord scourges every son. They're rebuked by the Lord. He disciplines those that he loves, and this is what this is being talked about. He's saying God's angry and his response is to discipline. His response is to scourge. His response is to leave them in their sin. His response is to allow the effects of his sin to come upon that person. They return to the jail of their own sins. And then until all is paid, until there is confession, until there is repentance, until there is return to obedience. That's the lesson. And then he generalizes this in verse 35, and he says, so my heavenly Father also will do to you, if each of you from his heart does not forgive his brother his trespasses, right? It is obviously talking directly to the disciples here. Most of it says, if you don't forgive from your heart, real forgiveness, not lip service, then he will do to you what has been done here, which is chastening, discipline, the loss of joy of your salvation, all of that. That is the lesson. So we are to be forgiven. All right, quickly, what are the main lessons we've learned from this? One, our sins are great, gigantic, enormous, 10,000 talents, and God freely forgives them. The offenses committed to us by our brethren are comparatively trivial. And we should therefore forgive them freely, just as God has forgiven us. And if we do not, God will be justly angry and will punish us. And the other thing I'll add is it may also prove that you have not been forgiven, i.e., you have not been saved, if you cannot act with forgiveness. Because those who are forgiven will forgive. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. If you remember those lessons, that's exactly what we said. If you are forgiven, you will forgive. It is a mark of a Christian. And if you don't, God's going to deal with you. Or maybe you're not a Christian. That last part.
Is it fair to say that God forgave, but he did not forget either? I would say in some way to give us comfort that just because we haven't forgotten when we forgive, it doesn't mean that we haven't truly forgiven from the heart.
Yeah, forgiveness from the heart really has to do with our attitude towards that person, right? It's not about information. It's about our attitude towards that person. Are we treating that person as if that thing had not happened? The forgetfulness is kind of an aside. Any other thoughts on this before we go to prayer time? I know we're running a little late, and there's a lot in this lesson. And frankly, if we want to talk about it a little bit more next time, we can do that, because forgiveness is tough.
This guy learned absolutely nothing from what God did from him.
Yeah. And what does that make you feel about us, right? Have we learned
Prefer-
anything?
Take his head off.
I didn't hear the last thing you said, Clint.
I'm just saying, the first servant he saw that owed him anything, I mean, it's like, he didn't think about anything God did for him.
Right.
He just wanted what he was supposed to be his.
And what I'm saying is, unfortunately, we act the same most of the time. We forget what God has done for us as we interact with others. So that's the lesson. All right. Let's see. Hugh is online. Hugh, you up for running the prayer time?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So we probably need somebody in the room to help point us around the room. First of all, let me, obviously Joe and I need some prayer. We're got this little, she's got a cough thing going on. She has been tested for COVID. I got this crazy sneeze thing, and I haven't sneezed in the last hour. So, you know, I'm doing better. But I don't know what's going on with that either. So appreciate your prayers for that. Anything else for us?
No COVID.
Yeah, we're no COVID.
Recording.
Oh, thank you. All right, Hugh, Tracy, you want to give us an update from you guys, and then we can go around the room?
I'm heading back to North Carolina in just a little while. Don't know how long I'll be there.